Miscarriage and stillbirth are extremely common experiences across the UK and indeed worldwide. And one of the worst things that you can do if you know someone who's experienced one of these things is to not talk to them about it, to be kind of embarrassed and not to say anything about it to them, because that can be one of the worst things, because people feel isolated and they're going therefore on their own through this experience, which is already extremely traumatic. So I'm Professor Jeanette Littlemore, and I work at the University of Birmingham in the English Language and Linguistics Department. And I'm investigating the language that people use. First of all, the language that people who've experienced the loss themselves use to talk about the loss, but also people who are there to help them, so either working with charities that deal with pregnancy loss or in the medical profession, talk to them about the experience and also convey information about things like, for example, what they're allowed to do with the baby's body, whether they can bury it, have a cremation, what happens in earlier stages when the body is taken off for sensitive disposal, what on earth sensitive disposal of the baby means. So all of that I'm looking at in the broader context of a project that I'm working on with colleagues from law and cultural anthropology. We've been working now for a number of years on a project where we're interviewing women who've experienced pregnancy loss, as well as those who support them, so people who work for charities such as Stillbirth and Neonatal Death Charity, or Antenatal Results and Choices, or the Miscarriage Association. And then we're also interviewing healthcare professionals, so midwives, bereavement care midwives in particular, and also funeral directors, to get a kind of like a fully rounded picture on the experience from all the perspectives of in a way, like those involved, for want of a better word, like the stakeholders in this situation. And the overall aims of our project are to look at the range of options that people are given following a pregnancy loss. So that might be options in terms of what they're going to do with the baby's body, but also at earlier stages when there's been, for example, a diagnosis of a fetal anomaly, what kind of choices people might want to make following that diagnosis. And we're also looking at the way in which information is presented to women, so the amount of information that's given about their various options and the language that people choose in order to present those options. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I think one of the interesting things to start off with is looking at the language that the women themselves use to talk about the experience. Looking at this language, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is the metaphors that they use to talk about it. Now, at first sight, metaphor might seem a bit of a strange way in to talk about when we're talking about the language of pregnancy loss. But in fact, metaphor is a very, very powerful form of language. It can be used to provide, by looking at the metaphors that people use, you can get insights into the way they're experiencing particularly traumatic events. And there are studies that have shown that when people have experienced something very sad, very distressing, or particularly something that's isolating, that's kind of like set them apart from the rest of society, metaphors are often the only kind of language that people have got to share their experience. And so first looking at some of the metaphors that women have used to talk about their experiences in our research. One metaphor that's very powerful is this experience of loss being both a physical loss and an emotional loss at the same time. So there's a kind of like a double whammy of loss. And that's kind of sets it apart. That kind of sets apart this kind of bereavement from other forms of bereavement where there isn't the kind of physical element to it as well. There's also quite a lot of kind of separation of themselves from their bodies. So often the women will talk about like themselves, and then their bodies are kind of metaphorically seen as something that's different from them, or something that's even got its own agency, like their body is kind of like almost responsible for the loss. So they can blame their body for the loss. They can distance themselves from their body. So this kind of idea that there's them and then there's their bodies is a kind of like a metaphorical way of describing the experience. And this can be quite a kind of a useful insight into what's going on. There's also interesting ways in which they talk about the experience of time. So one of the things that we were expecting to see when we started doing our research There are different ways of talking about time and experiencing time in English, but also in other languages. And there's some really interesting stuff because time is a very abstract concept. It's very hard to actually pin down time, but we often talk about it in terms of space. So people talk about kind of moving forward in time. So like the future is in front, we're looking forward to tomorrow, or the past can be behind. So back in last year when we were doing X, Y, Z, or back when I was young. And one way of thinking about time is that we kind of move forward through time. Another way is that time is like coming towards us. So like Christmas is approaching, Christmas is coming up fast. So you've got these kind of two ways of conceptualising the relationship between time and space. We were expecting in our interviews to see lots of examples of kind of like the women just experiencing time washing over them, because you kind of when a pregnancy loss has happened, you can feel extremely distressed and like you've got no power over anything and things are just like coming towards you, rather than examples of people like moving through time. Whereas in fact what we found was much more common was people sort of stepping almost right outside of the timeline. So like the world is carrying on without them and they are out here like watching things going on, and they're kind of almost not part of the world. And all of this can have like quite a big impact on how the people who are supporting people through pregnancy loss can best do so, and how they can facilitate things to make things easier in a way. One way in which we found that people want to deal with pregnancy loss, and also that we found that this is very often facilitated by particularly bereavement care midwives, is to kind of enact some of the metaphorical ideas that they are experiencing. So we have one example of a dad who'd always wanted to have his first beer with his 18-year-old son, but his son was unfortunately stillborn. So the midwives facilitated that. They said, well, you can still have your beer with your son, and he went and had a beer in the room with his stillborn boy, a kind of like metaphorically compressing the whole kind of 18 years of that boy's life into that one moment where he was having his first beer with him. So it's kind of like enacting this metaphor in a way. Other kind of instances of kind of, you might call it metaphorical thinking. It's a kind of perhaps one way of seeing the experience. Impacts on the way people feel about the way people who've experienced pregnancy loss feel about the behaviour of others towards their baby. So for a lot of the people we interviewed, the baby, even though it's not a live baby, it's still very much of a baby and needs to be treated as such. So it needs to have its nappies changed, needs to be looked after, needs to be cuddled. It shouldn't be sent off for post-mortem alone. It should be sent off with a teddy bear and that kind of thing. And we had one woman who was very upset because she said that she was lying in her hospital bed and the baby was in a cot next to her. And a midwife came in and stood between her and the baby in a way that she would never have done if it had been a live baby. And she was saying, this is like a lack of respect for my baby. Why did she have to stand between me and my baby? Why could she not sort of stand over there and acknowledge his presence in the room? So this is kind of it's not kind of like, literal or logical thinking, but I think this is very kind of, it's very, very telling that humans, we're not logical. We are not, in a world full of Spock. We are naturally kind of inclined to mix emotional and so-called rational thought as part of the way we deal with events. So that's about the way the women themselves talk about the experience. Moving on now to talk a little bit about the communication, because we asked them specifically about the way that things have been communicated to them and the choices have been communicated, and often that the communication with the healthcare professionals, particularly the midwives, was extremely positive. People had a lot of good things to say about the care provided by the midwives, particularly people who work as bereavement midwives. But talking to the midwives themselves, what they often said is that they lack support. There's often not enough time for them to give the amount of care that they want to give to women, and that they need more recognition of the really important role that they fill in these kind of circumstances. But quite often the women talked about feeling very, very, very overwhelmed by the whole experience. It was very difficult for them to take information in. So they're kind of almost like numbed by the experience, and then all of this information about choices, etc., is put to them, and it's very often difficult to process it. So one kind of takeaway thing from our project is that like, people need time, and perhaps they need information to be presented in very kind of like small chunks and perhaps repeated periodically, so that women get all of the information when they need it. But another thing that we looked at was the patient information leaflets. So these are the leaflets that are given out to people after they've experienced pregnancy loss, and they contain information about things like what kind of funeral they can have, what the provision is for kind of whether the babies are buried together or separately, and so on. And we found that there's a lot of good practice in the leaflets, so a lot of really good examples of the way these choices are presented, but also some not so good examples. So in some cases we found examples of, for example, over-religious language, or particularly Christian language, so assumptions that people's babies are going to heaven, etc. Whereas we're in a very multicultural society here. A lot of people don't have any religious beliefs at all. And we sort of question whether it's appropriate to have a religion mentioned so overtly in the leaflets. Another thing is we found sort of semi-directive language in the leaflets, kind of not exactly pushing people, but kind of indicating that one choice might be a better choice rather than as opposed to a different choice. So, for example, so in some leaflets you might get this choice between if you do this you will, or if you do that you would. And the choice between will and would, will is very strong and would is much less stronger. So it kind of suggests that the will option is kind of the preferred option. Or even things like most parents decide to do this, or many parents decide to do that. You get the feeling, well, if I don't want to do that, am I a bit odd? Am I not most parents? Am I not many parents? So in a way, it's perhaps better to say, some people like to do this, whereas others prefer to do that. We also found examples of kind of quite vague language where it was difficult to work out exactly what was being referred to. So things like references to a memorial service. So is a memorial service, in that particular case, it was actually referring to the funeral, but it wasn't using the words funeral. So a memorial service has a kind of a different meaning, which is not a funeral. So kind of vague language, or also kind of specific medical terms that were not necessarily glossed in a way that people would find it easy to understand them. So what we're doing with all this information is we're working with our partners in the project. So they are the organisations that I mentioned before, Miscarriage Association, Antenatal Results and Choices, Stillbirth and Neonatal Death Charity, but also the Human Tissue Authority, and also now we're working with the Royal College of Nursing. And what we're doing is we're working with all these organisations to put together some materials to help people who support those who've experienced pregnancy loss get through the experience. With, I was going to say, it's never going to be an easy thing to get through, but to make the experience more bearable in a way. And so some of the things we're including is we're designing materials for midwives on how to present the various choices that are available for people when they've experienced the loss. And we're also preparing materials for registrars and also for midwives who are helping people prepare for the registration process. Because we had some reports in our data of people turning up to register their baby and to be asked to sit with lots of people with their live babies, which of course is an extremely difficult thing. Also, the registrars tell us that a large amount of the time people will turn up to register a stillborn baby, and it will be an unmarried partner, or it would be the grandparents of the baby. Now they're not actually allowed to register a stillbirth, so they need to be sent away, and the mother or the married partner of the mother needs to be there to register it. So we're doing these bits of training with various organisations, and we've also been doing talks and presentations around the country about our work. So I think that's basically it in a nutshell. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this useful, and if you've got any comments or thoughts on the work, please put them below. Thank you very much.